Hello, everybody. Welcome to an American Discussion Podcast. This is your host, Drew, and my co-host, Michael, bringing you with another episode. Today we're getting into a little bit of space history, and I'm not sure if Mike prepared for American-only space history, if we're looking at the whole thing, so we'll get to that here in a little bit. As far as where to next, how was the weekend, Michael? I know it was a long one. What'd you do?
Oh, it was great. We took the kids camping for the first time, so it was really nice to get them out there and, let them play in the dirt a little bit, and, got our dog Maggie out there. It was her first time, not her first time out in the woods, but her first time overnight in a tent, so she did pretty good. So did the kids, so all around great time. What about you?
Yeah, so first thing, I still think it's hilarious that we both have dogs named Maggie.
Yeah, what color is your dog?
She's every animal in my house besides the cat, to include the kids and the adults, are all blonde.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the same color as my dog. That's weird.
Yeah, she's like a mutt that we got. We're pretty sure she was a Mexican street dog, because she got rescued by a organization in Southern California. And she was real timid and real gangly when we got her. Like malnourished, fur problems, the works. So, yeah, we got her and we got Milo, a golden retriever. So, as far as our weekend, okay. I had my wife and I had our 6-year anniversary. We were going to go to the range, but they were closed for Labor Day. So we ended up not doing that. She wants to get into a revolver instead of a semi-auto. So we had to get a chance to go test those out. But after that, we just got some lunch and went and picked up the kids from the in-laws because we went to a barbecue the day before. So they stayed there overnight and picked them up and really just hung out for a little bit. Had a lazy Sunday evening. Monday evening. My brain's all messed up. And then Amelia got ready for school.
All right. Well, yeah, that sounds like a great weekend. And if she wants to know where she can get some like comically oversized wooden, engraved and inlaid grips for her revolver, I know a guy. So.
Okay. We don't have it yet. I'm still trying to convince her against it, but I think it's I don't know. I'm not a traditional fan of revolvers. I think they're good for certain case situations, but other than that, semi-automatic's almost always better.
I really like the look of them aesthetically, and they're a lot of fun, So
yeah, and the ease of cleaning them is awesome. It's much easier to break down a revolver and clean it than a semi-auto. And it can't go out of battery as long as the cylinder's engaged, right? Where a semi-auto, if the slide's slightly pushed back, like God forbid you're pushing your weapon into something that you have to shoot, it won't go off with a semi-auto where a revolver will. So there's definitely pros and cons of both, but I tend to be a semi-auto guy.
Yeah, that's true. You also can't get the slide jammed or anything like that, but
the recoil's also worse.
Well, it depends. If you've got some like real heavy, oversized wooden grips on them, it can reduce the recoil.
Then you carry a brick, and then she'll have a brick in her purse. Where if I shoot a 22 cal Desert Eagle, it's got pretty low recoil too.
Yeah, that's true. They do make a good melee weapon when you're out of ammo.
They do.
When you're forced to get to hand-to-hand combat.
After you get through your 6 rounds, and I still have 11 left. Yeah, it's a limiting factor, that's for sure. I also tried to go over with her the hammer pull issue of how your pounds per trigger squeeze when the hammer's not cocked is a lot harder, and it's a lot harder to stay on target for that first trigger pull as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So they're all things that we discuss. I think there's a point though where your husband can tell you, but if your mind's set, it's set. You know what I mean? So I think it'll be good to just get one in her hands and let her experience. And I'm a big proponent of shoot what works for you. So what doesn't work for me might very well work really well for her. So I'm all for checking that out. Whatever makes you most comfortable.
Oh yeah,
Nothing's scarier to me
that's
than
definitely
somebody who's
true.
uncomfortable with a gun, holding a gun.
That's so true. And my wife, we went out to the range and test fired a few a while ago, and I have to say her least favorite one was the compact Glock.
I'm not a huge Glock guy. I know there's
the recoil on those is insane
because they're so small and they're all polymer. Yeah, no.
Yeah,
I think Glocks are overpriced for what they are. Personally, I mean, I understand the ability to modify them and put custom slides on and a custom barrel and swap out the sights, and you can do a different frame if you want to. You can get better stippling. I understand the modularity of it, and the customization aspect is cool. But they're just, they're not as good as the competitors, and they cost more usually. So I tend to not go the Glock way. I'm a Smith & Wesson guy for right now, but I also, Ruger's got some good guns out. Obviously HK, but HK's having their issues. Her pistol now is a SIG P320, so SIG's a good brand. I like it well enough.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely prefer the metal frame over the polymers, and you get a little more heft to it.
The problem, though, is you don't have a reciprocating slide to absorb a lot of that shock.
It probably as a result of it being the weapon I have the most range hours on. I really do like the military style M9, and then there's
the Beretta.
Yeah, the Beretta M9, and then there's also like a knockoff. One of their competitors has basically an identical one.
Oh, there's a bunch of knockoffs of Berettas. So I've met a bunch of Marines that in standard issue pistol in the Marine Corps is also the Beretta, or at least it was when I was in. I guess I know they're talking about upgrading to SIG because the soft community has upgraded to SIG and the Army's starting to upgrade to SIGs.
Yeah, technically that's already gone through, but I will tell you that I was in for a few more years after you, and I never saw a SIG. So
exactly, but I do know every Marine that I ever spoke to that was serious about shooting. Obviously there's Marines that shoot but don't actually they're not fans of guns. They just do it because it's part of the job. And anyone that I know that was serious about shooting and had shot a lot of guns, they all hated the Beretta. All of them.
Oh yeah, they were not what I would call user friendly or accurate,
reliable.
Especially the service weapons. Yeah, they also were prone to very very specific types of failure, but they were also very predictable. Is what I would say. Dude, you could clear a jam, very quickly.
So on my pistol qual, I lost 2 rounds to failure to feed, to stoppages. It was ridiculous. I lost 2 of my shots. Yeah. So I had to shoot even better to still make. I mean, luckily I'm a naturally good shot, but it was frustrating because I went to go shoot. I shot 2 rounds in. We were doing hammer pairs, successive hammer pairs. So bang, 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 bang. And so I went bang, bang, and I went to go pull the trigger again, and I realized the gun was out of battery. So then I went and racked it again, hit that hammer pair, moved on to the next drill, and on my second shot in that drill, I had another failure to feed issue. I was like, what the hell is going on right now? And it was ended up getting caught, and the brass was getting twisted and scraping into the receiver, so it was causing issues. I don't know if that was an ammo issue or a pistol issue at that point, but losing 2 shots on a qual, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with Marines and how they feel about their weapon qualifications, but they're a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I can only guess based on the way you feel about everything else. Hyper competitive.
Yeah, we're a pretty intense branch. And Any grunt I ever saw with less than a expert shooting on anything, I always talk shit.
Yeah, that's true. We kind of made fun of those guys in the Navy because just about anybody that walked around with, the pistol and rifle expert qual definitely paid for that range session.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were places right off base where you could go pay for a session, and they would you'd pay them $200 and they'd guarantee you an expert.
Hold on.
You
could
just keep
pistol
shooting.
qualled by a civilian?
Yep.
I never heard that before. That is insane. I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, apparently it was it's some place they had some kind of deal where you could submit the record to your electronic service record, and they'd update it and give you the ribbon,
the badge. That's crazy, dude. I can't even imagine the Marine Corps doing that.
Well,
like, we used to have gunners.
I'll tell you that.
I'm not sure.
I'll tell you that the Marine Corps would accept it. I don't know if it would be legit for
I doubt the Marine Corps
your
would
unit,
accept it.
but
We'd have a lot of pushback on that. We had gunners come down to the range and stop the pits, which I don't know if you guys use pits because you guys are mostly close quarters, but the pits are like where the targets go up and down from, and when you're not shooting, they do it in 2 relays, morning and afternoon. So if you shoot in the afternoon, then in the morning you're in the pits, raising targets, moving targets, stuff like that, marking shots, so the Marines downrange or uprange can see where their shots are hitting, stuff like that. We would have gunners come and stop the entire range. They'd count magazines, like rounds and magazines on targets, and then go down and count the number of shots on the target just to make sure we weren't cheating.
Huh,
and you're telling me that you guys could go buy expert badges. Like, it's just so foreign of a concept to me that I can't even imagine that.
That is what I'm telling you.
That's crazy. No, I'm not doubting you. That's the first time I'm hearing of it. That's insane. It just shattered a worldview of mine for the military. Why can't they do the PFTs? I'd have paid good money to not have to run PFTs, dude.
Yeah, if you could have paid for those pull-ups,
dude, I'd have paid $100 a pull-up. Like, shit. My runtime, shit, I'll pay $100 every 30 seconds. Shave them down.
Man, there's another thing that that'll probably blow your mind, but in the Navy, I could just say that I wanted to do the bike and I didn't have to run.
Yeah, that was so annoying. I had squid friends that used to do the swim, and I got so jealous, dude. Because I did the
swim is difficult, and rowing also very difficult.
So rowing is hard. The Marine Corps has rowing as an option once you hit, I think it's 45 years old. You can start doing the row, but it's age blocked. Yeah. So, and swimming is not an option for us at all. All you can do is run, unless you either have a physical ailment or you're above that 45. It might not be that age. I know it's somewhere around there, but I had this friend who was a squid, and they always did the swim, and I swam with them multiple times, and I could do the Navy swim test, no problem. I definitely have a problem now, but back then I didn't.
It's difficult to do really well on it, and it's easy to fail if you haven't swam before, like if you haven't swam distances.
Yeah, I mean, I swam a mile when I was 13. You know what I mean? So it's not like I'm new to the water.
Yeah. See, for me, I haven't done any long distance swimming, only short distance basically. So.
Yeah, we did it at scout camp. I did the mile swim. I think I did it 2 years in a row. I'm not gonna lie, it sucked. But I could do it. I did it. I did a lot of side stroke and backstroke towards the end, but you get there.
Yeah, as far as I remember, there was no form restrictions on the Navy swim. You just had to make it and not drown.
Yeah, dude, I've grown to love the butterfly stroke. I think it's amazing. I don't know why,
definitely.
But, dude,
and the backstroke too.
Yeah, backstroke's the best because you can regulate your breathing the best, obviously, because your head never has to go underwater. But as far as front-facing strokes, the breaststroke is always my favorite. Butterfly, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Freestyle swimming is just kind of awkward.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I like the front crawl. I mean, I can get good speed off that, but it gasses me so quick. There's not, like, fluidity. You're just fucking gritting your teeth and fighting the whole way. At least that was how I did it. But now we're 16 minutes in, so let's finally get to our topic of the day. What do you got, bud?
all right. Well, are you ready to take this podcast to the moon? Well, we're not actually going to take it to the moon, but we are going to talk about people who have gone to the moon.
Okay.
So how familiar are you with, I guess, space travel to the moon?
So I'm familiar with the space race. I'm obviously loosely familiar with the conspiracy theory around our moonwalk mission. And I'm familiar with the Apollo programs, somewhat. But that's about the extent of my space knowledge. I mean, obviously I know planets and space weather, but as far as, missions to space, that's about it.
Okay, well, we were going to exclusively talk about the planets and space weather.
Perfect,
so,
dude. Let's do it.
I guess I'm going to have to shift my rudder and talk about some of the history. So, okay, yeah. So I started my research with that space race age. So for anybody that doesn't really know too much about this, the space race was between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time. Kind of trying to, just another era of the Cold War, trying to see who could, build up that extension of power by going to space, putting satellites into space, into orbit, and then, seeing who could put a person into space and go the furthest distance. So ultimately, the Soviet Union kind of edged out the U.S. in almost every single one of those metrics. So to start it out, in 1957, Sputnik 1 was launched by the USSR, and that was a satellite. If you've ever seen the movie October Sky, that's kind of a space race era movie. I remember watching that as a kid in school. Really, really good movie.
I agree.
But yeah, kind of revolves around Sputnik 1 and then the U.S. response to that. So then in 1959, another Soviet mission, Luna 1, was a mission in which their spacecraft flew past the moon, and obviously gathered some good data, good information. But we're still not really into kind of any groundbreaking space travel yet. That was an unmanned mission. But then the first manned mission was Yuri Gagarin in 1961, a Soviet cosmonaut. So at this time, the Soviet Union has had basically 4.5 years of kind of unchecked space travel here. And other countries have tried and, kind of tried to give a good response, but ultimately nobody was really focused enough or had the resources going into it that the Soviet Union did at the time. Now, are you familiar at all with how the United States got into the space race?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay, so the president at the time was John F. Kennedy, and we kind of took this as a big affront to American superiority, and the fact that we were kind of in this Cold War arms race with the Soviet Union, and the Kennedy administration basically said, we are going to go to space and we're going to put a man on the moon. So he had this very famous speech, and I'm sure you'll recognize this quote. But in 1962, this was the speech where President Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard."
Because they are hard.
Yeah, I didn't do the voice justice.
I love doing presidential impressions. I don't know why, dude. I do Trump in the traffic. It's a good stress reliever. You're the worst driver ever. You're all terrible. I'm the best driver.
I had the best car. They said.
They said I couldn't do it.
This is the best car.
They said I couldn't do it, but I ran that yellow. I made it. The other guys, he didn't make it. He's a loser. It's a great time. I recommend it to anyone that's looking for a laugh in traffic.
Yeah, I love Matt Groening's president impressions, with the Simpsons and Futurama.
Shane Gillis has a good Trump, too. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Yeah,
so following that Kennedy speech in 1962, the U.S. really started up our space program as far as lunar exploration goes. And the first of those programs was the Ranger program. So as you can kind of guess by the name, the Ranger program was really getting out there and just scouting out the moon. So what the Ranger spacecraft would do was fly to the moon and then purposely crash into the lunar surface in order to get pictures and transmit them back to Earth.
Seems legit.
Yeah, so basically, what would you call that? A controlled landing, or
I don't know about landing.
Well, they definitely landed on the surface.
A controlled crash.
Yeah, something like that. But they definitely got good pictures and sent them back to Earth. So the mission was a success. I think that even if it wasn't meant to crash, NASA and most other countries deem a failed spaceflight like that a success if they actually get to the moon. And we'll see another example of that later on.
Ooh,
so in 1966, the Soviet robotic lander Luna 9 successfully landed on the moon. And that was early 1966, I want to say January or February. And that was, kind of a prototypical version of those rovers that we know today. The classic example is like the Curiosity rover from the Mars missions. But as a follow-up to this, the United States was already working on an advanced robotic lander, Surveyor 1. So in May of 1966, the United States was able to launch a response and get our own lander on the lunar surface. And now, following up Surveyor 1 was the Apollo missions. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Apollo missions in just a couple of minutes after I finish out the timeline. But those were obviously the most notable and most well-known of the lunar missions. And then in 1994, there was the Clementine orbiter, and then followed up by 1998's Prospector orbiter. So those were two lunar orbiters, basically satellites that just went around in lunar orbit and took pictures, and they essentially did a very, very detailed topographical scan of the lunar surface. So now we have these incredibly detailed images and maps of what the surface of the moon actually looks like. And then quite a big gap here. It's possible that I missed a mission somewhere in here, but 26 years later, the Odysseus lander was earlier this year the first private company effort to get a spacecraft to the moon. So the Odysseus lander was a pretty advanced robotic piece of equipment that was going to go out there and take a bunch of data, but unfortunately it landed sideways near the moon's south pole and was incapacitated. But it did get some really good data, and the company that launched the Odysseus lander deemed it a great success, said they learned tons of lessons, and basically it was 1 point for commercial space travel with that successful moon landing. So yeah, that basically brings us to today. Now, so how many of those programs were you familiar with besides the Apollo missions?
So the lunar missions, now that you mention them, with the lunar rovers and that, is more familiar. But there's obviously not anything that I could immediately recall that, at the forefront of my memory at least. So, other than that, yeah, it was the Apollo missions and the initial race, but not as much as I would like to say I knew. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think I remember learning about those orbiter missions when I was in school, because that was kind of the most recent thing that had happened. But most of that was stuff that I wasn't really familiar with. But now I've got a little bit from NASA and an article from space.com that will talk a little bit more about the Apollo missions and kind of the United States role. So between 1968 and 1972, 9 human missions were launched to the moon, with some people flying on more than one mission. 12 American male astronauts walked on the moon between 1968 and 72. And Apollo 8 was the first NASA mission to orbit the moon, and that was in December of 1968. Apollo 10 did a simulated moon landing in May of 1969, while Apollo 11 was that classic success in July of 1969, where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed and walked on the moon. Apollos 12 through 17 brought people to the moon between 1969 and 1972, and all landed astronauts, with the exception of Apollo 13, which suffered an explosion on the way to the moon, with Tom Hanks on board in April 1970, and made a successful and safe abort back to Earth.
And continued to make movies after that, believe it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's so crazy that, it was almost 30 years before they actually released all that footage that they took on board Apollo 13.
And the fact that he's just that versatile, he can be an amazing actor, and simultaneously also a space explorer, is just incredible.
And it barely looked like he aged a day.
Well, that's space. Space goes backwards with aging. I don't know if you knew that already or not, but you probably should, you fucking nerd.
Oh yeah, I think I saw a movie about that one too. Something about black holes, and if you get too close to them.
Exactly.
And then you can talk to the ghosts in your library.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. It's got a weird background and a weird filter over your eyes when it happens, but yeah, totally doable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the natural sequel to what he did in Vietnam, and the protests after that,
Mm-hmm.
winning the ping pong championships, and
The ping pong one was big. I think he also won an unofficial marathon. Not really sure how that works out though.
what a storied career that man has had.
Incredible.
Somebody should give him a medal.
100%. Another medal. I know he got at least one. It's light. I'm not sure which one. It was light blue. Maybe for being a baby boy. I don't know how that works, but
Oh yeah, and Kevin Bacon was also there.
I love that.
Moving on.
Yep. Anyway.
So now, kind of moving on from the Apollo missions, what's next? So NASA is preparing to send humans back to the moon with the Artemis program. The uncrewed Artemis 1 mission circled the moon in December of 2022 with 3 mannequins, a clutch of tree seeds, and numerous experiments, payloads, and CubeSats. I did have to look up what CubeSats are. There's some kind of satellite, like kind of a modular satellite. It was like an experimental technology that they were working on at the time. So Artemis 2 is expected to go around the moon with a crew of 4 people in November of 2024 or so.
Did you say poor people?
Including 4 people.
Oh, numerical,
generally, gotcha. NASA astronauts are
pretty affluent, to my
high-rank-
knowledge.
Yeah, high-ranking military officers. So probably not.
Oh, yeah,
Or
no,
former military
I thought that'd be
officers.
sweet if they did.
Yeah, I imagine that there are some politicians out there who would like to launch all the poor people into space, but that is not the point of this mission.
How would they pay for
so
it? The poor
3
people? They would pull themselves up to the moon by their bootstraps.
No, they would take it as their one civic duty to pay taxes to help those poor people get off of the earth.
Or you just let poor people not pay taxes in order to go to the moon. You sell it like a deal.
Yeah, that's true. And then all of the rich businessmen would be, banging down your door to pay for it.
Absolutely. I'd be in.
So this mission is going to have 3 NASA astronauts and 1 Canadian astronaut. And then Artemis 3 will attempt a landing at the moon's south pole in 2025 or 2026 aboard a SpaceX Starship, with future missions following to the surface and then the planned Gateway space station. So essentially what the Gateway space station is a modular space station that they're going to build in the moon's orbit. So they're going to do something called the Capstone missions to test the orbit of the Gateway. So they're going to put another satellite into orbit around the moon to make sure that that path around the moon is stable and that it will actually do what it's supposed to. So basically, it's kind of an elliptical orbit that brings the space station quite close to the south pole of the moon. That way they could kind of drop astronauts and payloads much closer to the lunar surface. That way they can have a controlled descent from kind of low in the moon's atmosphere, if you will,
Okay.
rather than a rocket ride all the way from Earth. So that one doesn't have excuse me, that one doesn't have a set date yet. But it's going to have a bunch of international partners, not just the United States. And all of these nations are tied together under something called the Artemis Accords. And the Artemis Accords are a set of statements that set out common principles, guidelines, and best practices that apply to the safe exploration of the moon and eventually beyond as humanity extends the duration of space missions and its reach to Mars. So that is the future that NASA has planned for lunar exploration, with the first crewed mission to the moon coming sometime this year, and then hopefully the following year we get another moon landing.
What do we think the odds of that are, given the mission with the 2 astronauts stuck up in space currently?
Well, they're planning on using a SpaceX rocket for the manned mission, and we kind of already we've talked about the Boeing Starliner debacle already, off podcast, but I think SpaceX kind of has a leg up on the both reliability and reproducibility of their rockets. So SpaceX has had plenty of problems and aborted launches themselves, but they seem to have learned from their past failures, and they have a pretty good track record overall.
Interesting. So earlier you said something I want to kind of bring it back to. I feel like it said a lot on news and companies like SpaceX say it, where they said the mission failed, but it was very informative. They got a lot of data from it. Now,
deemed a success.
What's that?
I said it was deemed a success.
Yeah, so
even though they crash landed into the moon.
I tend to be pretty familiar with why that is, but I know some of our listeners may not be. Perhaps they're not nerds like the two of us, and they don't look into nerdy stuff like that. Could you fill them in on why that could potentially be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a mission like this takes years and years of planning and engineering. Sometimes, it can take up to 10 years or something like that from, initial conception to going through that entire engineering process and, eventually creating a spacecraft and then launching it into space and getting it to, whatever your eventual target is. So, because it takes that much planning and there are so many unknowns in space travel, you just want to see if it's even possible. So even if you only get your rocket into orbit and then something goes wrong, well, you learned a lot of good stuff. You said, okay, we know that our launch platform is good, or our engine system, whatever it is. We know that is capable of getting us out of the atmosphere and into orbit. But then, such and such component failed. Now we've identified a weakness in our system. We'll learn and we'll get better and we'll try again next time. Now, if you make it all the way to the moon, well, you have all kinds of sensors on board, taking photographs and, recording different data, recording your speed, trajectory, all of these things, getting, positioning and your targeting down. That is a huge part of these missions. So even if just a slight, miscalculation was all that it took to throw you off course, or say some kind of outside influence that you didn't account for, those things are also very important for your next go. And these space missions, they learn from other attempts, not just our own. So we're taking data from other countries and providing our data to other countries so that humanity as a whole can get better at this.
That's one thing that I do really want to push home, is that this is one of the very few things in our world that is collaborative across nations. We tend to be very competitive with other nations in a lot of other regards, whether it be militaristic competition, economic competition, things of that nature, political sway over certain different nations, smaller nations. But space is one that we tend to almost always come together on.
Yeah, that's true, and it does take some planning and some international agreement, but for the most part, we've done a good job at that. We have treaties for basically how many satellites can be in orbit at one time, and who can claim what things and jurisdiction and what places. That way, if somebody commits a murder in space or, some horrible international crime, we know whose jurisdiction it is. That was an outlandish example, but really it's more so that people aren't going and, claiming the moon for their own country.
Yeah, which obviously they can't, but...
they can't because the United States has our flag firmly planted there.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I heard that China has been planning on getting there and making their own little moon settlement here in the next few years. Have you looked into that at all?
No, but I can imagine that China has just as good of, sound and video stages as the United States did in the 1960s.
Well, not as good as I heard it would take to fake something like that. But I'm sure China's technology that they've stolen from, other countries, not that they would steal intellectual property, but, if they were to, they could get some really good tech out of that.
Man, it would be really funny if they just colorized the original United States moon landing.
And photoshopped the Chinese flag instead. Dude, I'd be here for it.
Guys, we totally just landed on the moon. Check this out. This is live footage coming from you now. It looks so bad because it's so far away.
Yeah, it's got to make such a long transition to get here. That's the problem.
Yeah, disregard that we're getting basically 4K images from other countries' spacecraft.
Disregard Elon Musk taking videos of a Tesla he strapped to the side of a rocket in 4K live. Disregard that. We got issues.
Yeah, that was crazy. And you might think that Elon Musk is a crazy person. I know I do.
I think he's crazy in a good way.
But I will say that strapping a Tesla to a rocket and shooting it into space is really in keeping with the traditions that we've set for space travel. We shoot all kinds of ridiculous stuff into space.
I'll also say that it's just big dick energy, man. I also noticed that you didn't talk much about something else that I found really interesting as a kid, about sending monkeys and dogs to space.
Well, that's actually what the next words out of my mouth were going to be. I would say that, some really good examples of random stuff that we've sent to space are, yes, a monkey, a dog, rats. We have shot, basically every kind of plant into space that you can think of, insects, just all kinds of stuff, bacteria.
Which I think is a little scary, that we're sending bacteria to the moon.
Yeah, there are some theories that the moon and asteroids are sending bacteria to us as well. That there is bacterial life on other planets and other entities, cosmic entities that have made their way to Earth.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen pretty good evidence. Obviously, I'm not a biologist by any means, of the fact that life started on Earth based on asteroidal influence.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And we've seen some pretty convincing evidence that there are, either the necessary building blocks for life or potentially byproducts of life on other planets. We've also found, liquid water on planets in asteroids, I believe. But we don't have any concrete proof that, life, like a living organism, existed on any other planet. Like, we don't have that snapshot that says, yes, this was bacteria, at least as we know it today.
Yeah, I mean, so, all right, now we're broaching a topic that I get real interested in. What do you think?
The JFK assassination.
That too,
what?
but we can get into that as well, because that's a topic that frustrates the hell out of me. And I feel like that's something we can all be mad about, and not enough people are. But
the moon bacteria was on the grassy knoll.
That's where the other shots came from. No, the likelihood of alien life. What do you think that is?
Personally, I subscribe to the theory that if the universe is big enough, it definitely exists somewhere.
Same. I think it's a statistical, almost. It's almost statistically not disprovable. You know what I mean? Like the odds of having
with statistics, obviously there is a chance that there is zero life in our infinite universe.
But it is far more likely that there is life.
Some small chance. But yes, what we're talking about on that scale is like you have a 99.9% chance that life is out there somewhere,
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've basically proven that the universe is not infinite, but it is so large that, to the scale that a human brain is capable of
conceiving
on, it is infinite.
Yeah.
And we've found within our, small amount of reach as a species, through telescopes and different kinds of measurements, we have found several planets that would be, capable of supporting life, in that Goldilocks zone with liquid water. So if we've found a handful of these already, and the universe extends, orders of magnitude beyond what we're capable of imagining, it's got to be out there somewhere.
That's my thought on it too. My general assessment is the odds of there not being life forms of some sort is just highly unlikely. I also have another theory that we're getting into the depths of my teenage stoner theory years, and I'm sure I've told you this one before, that I think the Adam and Eve story and the whole creationist story can be explained as long as you take two things to be true. One, that time as we know it would be completely different than time for an omnipotent being, celestial being, right? So you're like God. Obviously, a day for us is based off of the Earth's rotation on its axis, exposing it to the sun, right? So that's how we get our 24-hour day. Well, if God predates suns, how do you know how long his day is? Right? So that's how I get around the... again, feel free to stop me whenever this sounds too half-baked. That's how I get around the time constraint. First day he made light, that's when he made the Big Bang and the stars, right? This is kind of how I mesh evolution and religious theory. And then Adam and Eve, the Bible's pretty clear, from what I remember. Obviously, I haven't actually read excerpts of the Bible since I was probably in catechism as a young boy. That Eve was made from the rib of man. Now, obviously, we also know that the Bible is a composition of books written originally in predominantly Hebrew and translated across the generations, finally as a common tongue by Martin Luther, blah, blah, blah. What if he was just saying that Eve was made from part of Adam, and we're talking about the splitting of single-cell organisms? What if that's Adam and Eve, and the simplicity and purity of single-cell organisms was the Garden of Eden, and evolution, eating that apple and making the bridge to a multicellular organism, is then how we got to kicked out of that purity of the single-cell organism. What do we think?
That's an interesting theory. I kind of extrapolating in my own brain as you're talking. I'm seeing basically that man was created as God's plan for these single cell organisms, saying that, you know, this organism will eventually become this creation that I want it to be, and then, you know, as evolution does what it does, you know, it basically you know, endowed humans with all of these flaws. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and on top of that, I think another thing that points to it, and I'm sure a lot of our religious people are probably screaming that we're blaspheming, and that's not the intent here. I just like the thought exercise of it.
Well, God was also a black woman in this story. So.
No, I'm actually going to get to what God was. If God is omnipresent, how would you draw him? He would just be, like, if you had to draw a picture of an omnipotent being, wouldn't it just kind of be like an amorphous blob?
Yeah, I think I would just, instead of drawing anything, I would just gesture to everything around me.
Yeah. See? Huh?
It's kind of my abstract sense of art.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think my single cell organism kind of meshes the two together.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And for a high teenager, I feel like that was a pretty good philosophical conclusion.
Yeah, and I can almost guarantee that the next thought that occurred to you was, what if we make as many sandwiches as we can and then see how fast we can eat them?
I've had that thought many a time, so it's likely.
We've brought that thought to life.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. So, this moon landing.
Yeah, so the moon landing, or a story of how a government entity tricked the entire population. You decide.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it was faked?
Okay, so basically there's a couple of different claims out there for the moon landing hoax. But essentially the biggest one is that there was a Hollywood stage where, you know, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong just like kind of jumped around on, you know, harnesses and strings,
mm-hmm.
and just pretended to be on the moon. And you know, the conspiracy theorists here say that, you know, none of that footage was live at all. It was all, you know, pre-recorded and then just pre-recorded and then just, you know, piped into whatever news broadcast, and they, you know, that NASA controlled the output, so, you know, played this pre-recorded tape as a live transmission so that, you know, all the different networks were playing it at the same time, and it appeared to be live, which was, you know, honestly, it would have been pretty complicated for, you know, the technology of the time, just to organize that portion and, you know, trick all of these TV studios. But there's a couple of different like nitpicky details that I've seen. Down to the Hollywood directors that they claim to be involved, to different government officials that they say are lying and all of this. But one of the big, I guess, factors that people point to say that there was clearly evidence for them to want to pull off this hoax,
just to be so convenient for press.
Yeah, as we talked about, the space race, and we also discussed how short of a timeline the United States was operating on here. So it kind of makes sense that some people would be a little skeptical of it.
Yeah, so one thing that I want to make pretty clear for those that aren't familiar, maybe they're not, fans of history, whatever that is how influential the space race was, and how really... I guess I didn't realize until I was in my early 20s how real the Cold War actually was, right? I thought it was just a bunch of, like, we were thinking that they were going to attack us, and they thought we were going to attack them, but nobody really knew, and that was kind of the end of it. And it was just this little, back and forth thing, essentially tit-for-tat staging instances. And really, no, it was more of a cultural war than a physical war at the time. We were battling, Hollywood cultural issues compared to Russian media. We were battling... Space was huge for this. This was a giant portion of the Cold War, was developing that technology, which also led to the development of the technology for ICBMs and things of that nature. So it was huge at the time, and I think that kind of gets glossed over in American history books, for at least what we teach, inner city high schoolers.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and it was very real at the time. Another thing that was going on right about that time was the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that conspiracy theorists point to say, hey, we were trying to get public attention off of the war and the war protests, and here's a great thing we're doing as a country, and then there's also the fact that the government raised about $30 billion to go to the moon, or NASA did rather, and they said that as kind of a rebuttal to the number of people that would have had to have been involved
in the conspiracy.
You could pay off all of those people with $30 billion by giving them all a very sizable payout, like $100,000 each, in the 1960s, and that's a pretty good amount of money to have somebody keep their mouth shut for a while.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I also think you'd get at least one, because you'd have to have people in positions of relatively high patriotism levels, right? You got military members that are being astronauts. You got military scientists that have developed the technology. People that are doing it for for noble causes. And I think plastering over that to say, well, everyone's got a price, I think that's kind of pessimistic and arguably a little nihilistic.
Yeah, so in one of the articles that I read, there's a physicist that basically took a bunch of data from other known conspiracies, and like government secrets, and crunched all the numbers, and he said based on these real life conspiracies that happened, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and
which
the FBI
is
forensic
horrible
scandal, yes, and the NSA's surveillance program that
MK Ultra, all that.
Yeah. So they took all of these real life conspiracies and they said how many people were involved and how long did it take for somebody to spill the beans? And obviously this is an oversimplification, but they estimated that the moon landing would have had to involve about 400,000 people that knew some bit of information that would give away the conspiracy, and that at maximum it would be 3.5 years from the time of the moon landing to somebody giving it away. So the fact that it's been 60 years and we haven't heard a peep out of anybody saying, that there's, a shred of doubt.
And if we're operating under the presumption that greed is what made them keep silent, why would they not speak out 60 years later and have a deathbed confessional or memoir just for the monetary gain? Not even a deathbed memoir. Like, you know what I mean? Just a retirement memoir. Why not have one? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so additionally, there's some other things that you can point to. So we have like moon rocks and specimens that have been collected from these moon missions that have undergone independent testing by hundreds of agencies, and they all come to basically the same conclusion that these are of extraterrestrial origin, and there's nothing of this composition that's found on Earth, right? And then beyond that, we have images of the landing site from other independent missions that go up there. So people can, you can see the landing site of the Apollo 11 mission right now, because there's no wind up there that's like blowing these things away. I mean,
I would argue that point. There's not wind how most people traditionally understand it.
Okay, solar wind of electromagnetic radiation and all of that. That's not going to blow away the sand and
correct,
the fine dust on the moon's surface.
No, but you know me in semantics and you know me in weather. There is technically what's called solar wind, and we hear it all the time. It's what gives us the static sound on a lot of our satellite radio, stuff like that. Not like as you think of a sat phone, but transmissions coming from satellites are often interfered with by solar wind.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And it can cause what's called scintillation. I encourage you to look it up. It's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept of scintillation. We have radiation detectors based on that concept that are used pretty frequently for tracking radioactive contamination. But I didn't know that was a principle that was applied to other types of electromagnetic radiation as well.
And literally a lot of people don't understand basic weather impacts or verbiage. So, fun little fact, I'm going to nerd out here. So, the sun rays that we feel on our skin, for the first example, that's just radiation from the sun. That's not actually... a lot of people think of it as just light comes off the sun and just heat. So that comes in the form of radiation caused by the nuclear fission in the sun. It's a direct result. That's why you get sunburn. It's a low-grade cellular burn, right? It's not the same as you got your hand a little bit too close to the fire. It's not the temperature causing it. It's actually the radiation or the UV waves from the sun causing that. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I would say more familiar than most with how electromagnetic radiation works. But I didn't know that until I learned the principles behind that as well. Just like a really, really strong light bulb can also give you that hot burning feeling.
Exactly.
It's the same kind of thing, dependent on your distance. Like, obviously, if you're too close to it, you're going to get that actual like heat radiation from the electricity inside the light bulb. But the further and further away you are, the more that electromagnetic radiation takes over.
Correct. Yep. And that's one thing that another weird tidbit that a lot of people don't realize. The only reason that life is possible on Earth, and this is a core necessity for any planet that is to have life as we know it. Obviously, there's ways. I'm sure there's ways out there to have life that we're unaware of. But just in the form that we're aware of it, without our magnetosphere around the Earth, we wouldn't survive. The radiation on the sun would wipe every form of life out, which is why we don't see life in any other planets in our solar system, because they don't have the magnetospheres as strong as ours to block that radiation. And basically what the magnetosphere is because we are a giant flying ball of molten iron, our planet is magnetized. And you're familiar with polarity. This is actually a really difficult thing to display, to explain without visual display. But basically, our magnetosphere creates an electromagnetic force field around the Earth to stop radiation. And it actually is constantly changing based on what's going on in the core and based on the cosmic influences from outside of it. But it essentially looks like a comet or a tail. It's invisible. You can't see it, obviously. It's magnetism. But it essentially looks like a comet because it's getting blown so hard by the solar radiation. But that's actually what protects us. And that's also what causes Aurora Borealis, the most commonly known northern lights, right? There's also southern lights, but they happen from the poles in because it's a discharge of stored up energy that has gathered in the magnetosphere and projects itself as light.
That's interesting. So, fun fact about the electromagnetic field around the Earth is that for some reason, every so often, and this is on a span of hundreds of thousands of years or so, the electromagnetic field around the Earth, that magnetosphere, collapses and reforms in opposite polarity.
Correct.
And some scientists theorize that this has led to some of the mass extinction events on planet Earth, and we are overdue. We are due for another flip in the magnetic field of the Earth.
And the scariest part is we have no idea why it happens.
Yep, and
no idea.
We are also seeing that divergence from magnetic north to true north, which some people think is a sign that it might be happening soon. But soon in this case could be a matter of 10,000 years. So
not
like the yellow.
Yes, a lot like the Yellowstone situation, where we don't know why it's going to happen. We just know that it happens every once in a while, and it hasn't happened in a long, long time.
Yep. So
just another thing to add to your potential 2024-2025 bingo card.
Yeah, if you're an agoraphobic, we'll give you a couple more reasons not to leave the house.
Also, just max out your credit cards. Spend all the money. Don't worry about it. The world's going to end. And they're not going to be able to collect, right? We got a magnetosphere. We got the Yellowstone incident. We have global warming, which that's another topic that I would like to touch in the future. I think that that's one that's definitely way overblown in our modern society for political gain. But, there's a whole bunch of stuff to be scared of. So you can either be scared of everything or be scared of none of it.
That's true. I tend to be scared of none of it, which, I don't know if that's the correct version of things, but it makes me live my life pretty comfortably, so.
Yeah, I tend to be more afraid of man than I am of nature, just because man can be controlled a lot easier than nature can.
Yeah, that is true. And, we talk about these doomsday scenarios a lot of the time. But, in the case that something like that does happen, like Yellowstone erupts or the Earth's magnetic field collapses, it's really other people that you have to be more afraid of than, the environment around you.
Yeah. I've said this for a while now, and I'll say it probably till the day I die. Humans are the scariest thing on this planet, by far, bar none. We're really terrifying creatures.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when you get rid of the society that glues us all together, we're basically the monsters from a horror movie. Yeah,
we are capable of immense amounts of violence and carnage, and the only thing holding that back is I was actually talking to a guy at work about this today. He's a younger guy, and he tends to not be as politically informed, but he's kind of looking for more information. And you and me kind of have a borderline autistic yearning for information. I was talking about it today. I was like, basically, governments as old as time, all the way back, their primary purpose has just been to control young men. Because young men create most of the problems in the world. Or at least they're the fighting arm that kills in the name of those problems, right? They commit most of the rapes, they commit most of the violent crimes, they commit most of the treacherous behavior that's carried out just because of their ability to project strength. Young men are scary. Not to say that young women can't be scary as well, but,
Yeah, that is true, and back in the days of history that we're kind of talking about, women generally didn't have as many rights, or weren't seen as like on equal footing with men as far as military and that kind of thing goes. So as you said, it's really the what you would call fighting age males.
Yes.
That were the problem,
and have been forever.
A conquering civilization.
Yeah, we're always the problem. But I will also say we tend to be the solution as well. Most of the good things that have happened as far as legislatively, again, this is because women didn't have rights for a long time. So it's kind of a biased stat, I guess. But most of the good things were voted on by men. Because they're the only ones that could vote. But still, fact's a fact.
Well, another fact for you is that when the Apollo missions landed on the moon, they deployed a bunch of mirrors called retroreflectors, and the retroreflectors were part of the Laser Ranging Retroreflector Experiment, or LRRR. I think that acronym is actually just as hard to say as saying the entire acronym out. But really, the whole point was so that you could shoot a laser from the Earth and get a ping back from the moon from one of these reflectors and measure the distance and basically triangulate where on the moon that reflector is. So they collaborated with independent parties to track the Apollo missions as they were happening. So not only did we do it for Apollo 11, but we also did it for Apollo 12, 14, and 15. And the Apollo 14 and 15 missions were tracked in real time, and these independent observatories were able to pick up the signals from those retroreflectors on the day that they were put down.
Interesting.
So basically, they were shooting lasers at that target, landing zone the whole time, and then as soon as they deployed them, they were able to get a ping back within 24 hours.
That is interesting.
So I think the retroreflector experiment is kind of the biggest piece of evidence that you have towards, the moon landing being actually real. And if you say, okay, well, you could have just deployed satellites up to the moon and then dropped reflectors down, like really, okay, if you're getting spacecraft all the way out to lunar orbit, why are people so skeptical that we couldn't have landed astronauts,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Well, I mean, that is a
times.
much more complex issue. Getting to space is much easier than landing on a moving object through three-dimensional space that's also spinning at an inverse direction, so magnifying the speed of it. It's a complex problem. Not one that my brain is capable of figuring out, that's for sure.
Yeah, I can understand that, but when coupled with the fact that we have, we left things there, we brought things back, we have evidence that we went and landed, I think the evidence that it happened significantly outweighs any of the conspiracy theories.
I would agree with that.
It is fun to think about them staging this in some Hollywood stage.
Yeah, soundstage.
Yeah, directed by Alfred Hitchcock or whoever it is that they claim to be the director these days.
Yeah, I that's one of the ones I can never get behind. I really wanted to. I tend to like conspiracy theories. I think they're fun. I think they're really interesting thought experiments. I just can never get behind that one. I always felt it was a little too far-fetched for me personally. So let me ask you this.
I think go ahead.
What are your thoughts on us blasting out signals into space for the last 60, 70 years? Do you think that's good? Do you think that's hopeful for a positive potential terrestrial contact? Is it something we should be worried about?
So, all in all, I think that the chances of there being an intelligent enough species to both receive and translate those signals is pretty low. Not to mention the odds of a species of intelligent life that's smart enough to both receive, translate those signals, and then also come looking for them with hostile intent.
I never specified hostile intent.
No, I mean, I'm just kind of going on my thoughts on the matter here.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I think that is incredibly low. So, what I'm really getting at is that I don't think there's really any significant risk of us transmitting signals into deep space. In fact, I think that any intelligent life that was smart enough to receive and decode those messages would really be, basically as overjoyed as humans would be if we received a signal from, some other intelligent life deep in the universe.
See,
that was really just saying, we are here, this is us, this is who we are.
That same line of thought is what makes me scared of it. Is that they might do the same thing humans would do, and historically speaking at least, we don't do great things when we find new places.
That is true. If you've ever seen the movie Avatar, that's
exactly
kind of what happened there.
I mean, or if you look at, the Americas, granted, that's a little conflated, I think. I don't think the intention was to commit a mass genocide using biological warfare, but I think it was more of an unknown accident, seeing as they didn't even know what a germ was then, let alone the ability to weaponize it. But yeah, no, we tend to do pretty bad things because we definitely also went on a mass killing campaign for the following 100 years, 200 years after we landed. So people do bad stuff. Again, to bring it back.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Again, I do think that if you were to create a scatter plot of the most likely forms and tiers of intelligence of life among Earth, humans would be like way at the tippy top of,
Potential.
the most advanced.
So
because you have such a scale, but at the same time, that's really based on our frame of reference for what life is, right?
Yes.
So you could also have some beings that are so much more wildly intelligent than we are that we can't even comprehend, right? So,
and that was going to be my next point on that. I do want to ask a follow-up question based on that, though. What do you think is going on with the what do they call them now? UAPs? Is that what they call them? That all these naval aviators are running into off the coasts.
So I've heard a couple of theories about that. One is the classic government cover of
Prototype
weather balloons.
I don't buy that one bit.
No. So that's the classic government cover for government experiments.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably pretty likely is either domestic or foreign military hardware that is classified in some way. For people that don't know, the United States has some form of pretty advanced anti-missile defense program, and nobody really knows what all of the elements are. So there could be some sort of active element that is, kind of almost like drone-based or like some kind of low orbit satellite or something like that, that is undetectable by radar, but can potentially have some kind of visible sighting in the right circumstances.
So do you think there's any credibility behind what the naval aviators have said about it, as far as descriptors of it being a cube inside of a translucent sphere? Do we think there's any...
that is a strange description that I have not heard before, but I have heard of them saying that it moves like
Commander
nothing else.
Fravor.
It moves in 3 dimensions and seemingly jumps between points.
Yes.
And all kinds of things like that. But from what I've heard, it's mostly them describing it as either a light or a cluster of lights all moving together. But no, I do think that those sightings picked up pretty close to when drone technology was picking up. So I really wouldn't be surprised if the United States government or some other government was kind of on the cutting edge of that type of technology. And as I'm sure drones can move in ways that
yes.
Larger aircraft definitely cannot.
So I just pulled it up. David Fravor, he was a commander in the United States Navy. He flew F-18s off of the Nimitz. It looks like he also flew... he was part of the Black Aces. Flew off the Nimitz. Part of the FA-18 squadron of VMFA 232. And he spoke with... This is a document I'm looking at right now from the House Oversight Committee, where he goes over his sighting. And it's pretty good reporting. This one is the Tic Tac that he talked about. So that's how he described it, Tic Tac shaped. And multiple pilots corroborated this sighting as well. It's something I really encourage not only you, Mike, but all of our listeners to go take a look at. And I'm not saying it's real. I mean, it could be a loon. I think as far as witnesses go, I tend to trust naval aviators more so than people on the ground that distill moonshine or do acid in the woods. I think that aviators tend to be pretty locked on, especially military aviators. So I think it's got some credibility. At least makes me ask the question of, well, what if?
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting, and I've seen a lot of those same reports, and I was pretty interested when they did an actual hearing about it, and invited a bunch of these naval aviators and people who had been on official record saying that they had these sightings, and these are trained military pilots, like as you said, not just some guy out in the woods, that claimed to see Bigfoot. So
exactly. But at the same time, sometimes there's a pretty good explanation for that. We might just not have all of the pieces of the puzzle right now. Who has them?
So,
because I want them.
I'm also
give me aliens or give me death.
I recently went down a rabbit hole. I recently went down a rabbit hole of looking into all of the supposed, alien bodies that they've dug up, and alien mummies from all of these different countries, mostly in Central and South America. Most of them have been irrefutably proven to be hoaxes at this point.
Yeah.
But, every single news report that you see kind of gives you hope that somebody
maybe
dug up
this
an
is
alien
the one.
Maybe this is the time that we realize that humans are bred from aliens, like that Prometheus movie.
Yeah, I think it's a good theory. It's a fun theory, at least.
Yeah, like how did humans build the pyramids? There's no way they could have done that without outside help.
Yeah, that one's another very curious one in my mind as far as how it was done.
Well, have you ever seen the movie 10,000 BC? They did it with mammoths and slave labor.
Yeah, still not convinced. I don't know what it would take to convince me, but it's more than that.
What if I showed you a live news report from 1969 of mammoths and slave labor building the pyramids?
I don't think that would do it for me, to be honest with you. Maybe I'm being a fucking stickler for sourcing, but I think that sourcing that post-dates the construction of a building by like 2,000 years and change is probably not reputable sourcing.
But what if the mammoths dropped reflecting mirrors and brought you back rocks from the pyramid?
What if the government made the mammoths gay?
I don't see how that would support our theory of
I just
but
thought
it
maybe,
would
it
would explain the sudden extinction of all the mammoths.
They just turned them all gay one time.
And then they only lived for another generation.
You say evolution? Nay. Anyway.
All right. Well, that was all I had for this episode. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about before
we need to figure something else
here?
out, because we can't end on gay mammoths.
Gay frogs.
That's where I was getting the joke from. The old Alex Jones conspiracy theory.
They're turning the frogs gay.
Every conspiracy theory conversation somehow finds its way to Alex Jones. I don't think it's a serious conspiracy theory if he hasn't talked about it.
I'm sure you can dig up Alex Jones talking about the moon landing.
Oh, I'm sure.
Surprisingly, he's probably fully on board with the fact that it happened.
Yeah, I think that was one that he would, no, that definitely happened. We actually got to be looking at and then he'd go off on some random insane tangent.
Yeah. Yeah, Sesame Street.
Yeah. And they had Big Bird, and Big Bird was on Epstein's Island. Just something ludicrous. Luda.
And Kermit's the one turning all the frogs gay.
Yes. There we go. That's moving the gay frogs from Gay Mammoths is marginally better, I guess. So that might be as good a place as any to end it.
All right. Well, I had a great time talking about the moon landing.
Yeah, dude, it was fun. We need to have more lighthearted conversations more often.
Oh yeah, definitely fun. It turns into just kind of a bullshit session, but hopefully it was a little bit informative at least.
If not informative, at least entertaining. We got to get something.
Absolutely.
Well, all right, brother. Until you want me to take the outro?
Absolutely.
Alrighty. Well, I appreciate everyone for listening. Anyone who may or may not. Until next time, I will see you guys later. And Mike, I love you, brother.
I love you too. We'll talk to you next time.